Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I want to thank you for joining us today. We have opened up a brand new series that has to do with small things. You've probably heard a lot of different things about small things. But I want to try to bring to the table a compelling look as to why small things matter. I think it's important. Many times we go through life and don't even pay attention to the small stuff because we're so influenced by the big stuff. We're influenced by what we see that's more impacting to our eyesight, but we give very little regard to what is minuscule, what's tiny, what's outside, what's unnoticeable. I want to add some value to that because even in our own lives, we can begin to reshape our vision by placing value on the small things. So it's the small things, it's the little things that matter. And last time we were together, we talked about a few things in that regard. And let's kind of recap that and let's see where we are today. In our second segment of It's the Little Things, a compelling look as to why small things matter, part 2. What we've learned thus far is this. It is easy to become discouraged when we see how little we can do and how little we have to do it with. We talked about this the last time when we talked about Zerubbabel, who was the one that was going to finish the temple that had begun. And we find there were a lot of players that were involved in the second temple. We find it was Nehemiah. We find that it was Ezra. We find that there was a collection of people that was involved in the reconstruction of this temple. And as they were moving along, we learned that they had little effort. Little things were beginning to manifest. And so what did that do? It kind of breeds discouragement. It's easy to become discouraged when we see how little we can do and how little we have to do it with. We also learned the last time that people who despise the day of small things are easily discouraged. And as an outcome, they discourage others. You know, people may say like, well, ain't nothing going to come about this. So, this ain't about anything. And the poison of that can spread to other people to where they'll begin to say, you know what, you're right. Nothing's going to come of this. This is not about anything. And so now you have people that have bought the vision of a lie or have bought the vision of discouragement. When we visit the Old Testament, we can clearly see some of this, how this comes into play. How when people get easily discouraged and as a result, discourage others. You know the story, and if you read the Bible in the Hebrew scriptures, it talks about how God had told Moses to pick out 12 leaders from these tribes, as it were. There were 12 tribes, one from each tribe, as it were, to go and spy out the land. What land? The land that he had promised them. And as a result, he sent these 10 spies out. And when they came back, 10 of them came with a bad report. And the other 2 came back with a good report. And as it went on, we find that it was the influence of the 10 that everyone seemed to just kind of, well, this is the way it's going to be. This is how it's going to be. And the influence of the 2 was disregarded. Yet when the time came to where everything kind of settled out and played its part, we find those who followed the influence of the 10, they didn't get an opportunity to make it into the promised land. But Joshua and Caleb did, because why? They saw something that the others did not see. They did not look at their small number, as it were, as being the as being a deficit. They rather looked at something. They looked at what God said and what God was saying and what God had said to them. They were able to place their trust and their vision in the promise rather than to place their trust and their vision in the people who had a discouraged point of view as to what was displayed in front of them. And what was displayed in front of them? Well, those 10 spies came back, and what did they say? We be as grasshoppers in their sight. What did Joshua and Caleb say? We be more than able to overcome them. So who did they listen to? The majority rule. The majority led the rest of the people down a path that they hadn't planned on, a path that they could have gotten, they probably could have moved quicker along the way had they valued not their small size, as it were, as a people, but rather valued the promise that God made to the people who he said, this is your land. So people who despise the day of small things are easily discouraged and discourage others. So here's a quote by Napoleon Hill. And he says, if you can't do great things, do small things in a great way. If you can't do great things, then do small things in a great way. Greatness by accumulation. Now, this quote by Napoleon Hill suggests that even when it appears you can't do great things can still be accomplished by doing small things in a great way. Our society has taught us to measure greatness by accumulation. So we look for greatness first by what we see quantitatively instead of qualitatively. We have a tendency to judge someone's or something's greatness by the quantitative or cumulative standards of success. For example, the higher your IQ, the number of sales achieved in a quarter, the number of correct items on a test, the number of members in your congregation or partners in your ministry. These are quantitative measurements or conclusions as to whether or not someone is successful or they can be regarded as being have reached a high achievement. That's greatness by accumulation. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but our society has leaned more to this area rather than to the qualitative aspects of success. You can have success from a qualitative point of view that has nothing to do with the quantity or has nothing to do with accumulation. Now, there's a side step. Let's just take a brief look at the descriptions of quantitative versus qualitative. Now, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, and in the research phase, I had to choose a method that I was going to use as an informant or as a researcher. Which method was I going to use to either prove to prove my thesis or either to disprove it? Or to what style, what method was I going to use? And there are basically two types of styles or research strategies that are out there, and they're a combination of these: qualitative and mixed method, or rather qualitative and quantitative. Oftentimes there are research approaches that combine the two, which is a mixed method. But for our topic today, I want to give you as the listener, you as the viewer, a understanding how we can have success from qualitative point of view or either a quantitative point of view. Conceptually, from a qualitative standpoint, qualitative is concerned with human behavior from the informant's perspective. Quantitative, on the other hand, is concerned with discovering facts about social phenomena. So there are different conceptual approaches. One is coming from is the informant's perspective on human behavior, and the other is coming from facts about social phenomena. Another thing to note about qualitative is that it assumes a dynamic and negotiated reality, where from a quantitative standpoint, it assumes a fixed and measurable reality. So there's a difference here. From a methodological standpoint, from a qualitative standpoint, data are collected through participant observation and interviews. Quantitatively, data are collected through measuring things. So one is collected from the participants' observation and interviews. In other words, the interviews that the informant conducts and the observation, the informant is the one that's actually collecting this data, and that data has come from participant observation and those interviews, where quantitatively it's data that are collected through measuring things. We can also look at data are collected by themes from descriptions by participants. Quantitatively, data are analyzed through numerical comparisons and statistical inferences. In other words, from a qualitative standpoint, you interview enough people, which in the case that I did, you interviewed enough people, and what was the emerging theme that each of the people that was shared from what you heard from those interviews that was part of a particular question. And from that emerging theme, they may have all a similar answer. That gives you, hey, from this standpoint, this is the theme that's associated with this particular question. And that is a degree of success. Where from the other aspect, from a quantitative standpoint, and data is analyzed through numerical comparisons and also statistical inferences. Data is also reported in the language of the informant. Quantitatively, data are reported through statistical analysis. So from a qualitative standpoint, you find that it's the informant or the researcher that's involved with this process. Quantitatively is usually they base it upon something that's measurable, something that's statistical, something they can put a statistical inference or numerical comparison to. That is basically the difference. You can have success in life from either one of these perspectives. But we are living in a society that's leaned more to the quantitative, the numbers, the amount of numbers versus the quality. Now we're going to look at some more of this, as we go through this series. I want us to understand the value, because the value that we find in small stuff is more qualitative and not quantitative. And we'll get to that. We'll talk about that. Let's move on a little bit further. One of the things we can learn about small stuff is that small, measured, and consistent are one of the unique aspects of this particular approach. However, there are things where quantity does matter, and I kind of alluded toward that. We kind of lean toward the quantitative aspect only in our society and spend very little time over here on the qualitative aspect. For example, if I was to use a biblical reference to give a clear-cut idea from the qualitative and the quantitative, we cannot forget the widow's mite. In the story of the gospel, we find that it was this widow who gave this very small amount, this mite, as it were, maybe a penny, as compared to this other person who gave large sums of money. And from the idea of someone looking on, this person that was able to produce or contribute large sums of money, we consider that person a big fish. We consider that person as someone that can really help me get to my budgetary goals a lot quicker. We can look to that person that can maybe benefit me personally because why? They have large sums of money. And so when they brought this large sum of money to the temple, Jesus said it was the woman that gave more than the one that had the quantity. The qualitative amount was greater than the quantitative amount. Why? It was because she gave all she had. Her heart was in that. That just might have been for the one that had a lot of money, that just might have been a tip of the iceberg, and measurably, it was probably she gave more. And so the idea is that it's not always the quantity that matters, but it's the quality that matters, and that's what Jesus was emphasizing there. There are other aspects we can find in the gospel where smallness does matter. For example, the mustard tree. In the mustard tree, Jesus gave this parable that it was the smallest seed of all the herbs, yet when it blossoms and blooms, it turns into a great tree where birds can come and lodge and so on and so forth. But it starts out small and emerges large. So my point should be well taken here. However, there are things where quantity matters. What we accumulate matters. For instance, how well your financial portfolio performed in the last quarter, or how much is needed to make a quality decision for retirement. But even in these notable accomplishments, generally it is not the instantaneous growth that creates sustained wealth. Let me say that one more time. It is not the instantaneous growth that creates sustained wealth, because it requires something more. And in this case, it is those small, measured, and consistent contributions, regardless of the shortfalls along the way, that matter. For example, along this path where you are required to produce small, measured, and consistent contributions to sustain wealth, or to sustain growth, or to sustain success, or even to achieve it, there are going to be shortfalls along the way. And a lot of times they come up, they're pop-ups, I call them. They pop up out of nowhere. They are the unplanned. These are things that come about that we did not even intend to get involved in, but they just so happen to come along the path. We must understand that there are certain things that along this path are going to happen anyway. And if I understand that when the shortfalls do come my way, then what do you do? You're prepared for it. If you play the stock market and you find that, oh, my stocks are dipping, oh no, I'm losing money. But what does your stockbroker tell you? They tell you to ride it out, because they're supposed to be the expert to know that there are going to be shortfalls, there are going to be dips, there are going to be peaks and valleys. And sometimes you ride it out. Sometimes you got to know when to hold, and other times you got to know it's time to fold. But in this case, when it comes to small, measured, and consistent contributions that are needed to acquire success, most people don't like waiting for it. They want it to happen now. They don't want to wait. They want it right now, quick, fast, in a hurry. They want it microwave, quantum leap right into their current reality. Here are some things that we can take away from today's topic. Small things require patience. As we learned the last time, we have a tendency to disregard or dislike the day when very little is happening, or when it is not happening on our timetable. We, in many cases, do not have the patience to wait for something worthwhile to grow. Let me say that again. We, in many cases, do not have the patience to wait for something worthwhile to grow. Some things require patience that will, over time, have a huge impact. We got to put patience to work and in our particular process here. You got to put patience to work. Some things require patience that will, over time, have a huge impact. Small things require a large vision. Those who place a high value on small efforts generally have a large vision. Those who place a high value on small efforts generally have a large vision. They can see the end where others are short-sighted by the stall. In other words, you got to know that these small efforts are going to pay off after a while. So I'm not going to get discouraged because of how long it's taking, but I'm going to relish in the fact that my small efforts are going to generate a harvest, the desired harvest in the future. So I'm going to place a high value. In other words, the farmer places a high value not on the crop, but on the seed. The farmer places a high value not on the crop, but on the seed. Those who place a high value on small efforts, they can see the end where others are short-sighted by the stall. Well, why is this thing taking so long? You know, it shouldn't take this long to get from point A to point B or to get exactly what's promised. And we find that a lot of times that even in some of these business ventures that are out there, even like especially in network marketing, and believe me, I have nothing against network marketing or multi-level marketing opportunities. But the thing that they require, as it does in other types of business models, it requires small efforts. It requires small efforts that generally have a large vision. It requires the individuals to not be short-sighted by the stall. It requires people to be consistent with small little efforts. And in those kind of opportunities like network marketing, you got to be committed for the long haul. You can't be sold on the hype that you're going to become financially independent right now and not put in but a few ounces of work. You got to be committed, and sometimes not just a few months, but you have to be committed to maybe years to acquire exactly what it is that this type of opportunity produces. And there are great opportunities like that that are out there that require you to do that. But what happens to a lot of people, they get sold on the hype and then they run into a stall and then they say, ain't nothing about that. They move on. But how is it that people can make millions in these network marketing opportunities if it was not possible? What it was and what it is those small efforts. But those small efforts are the things that are required by the person who has a large vision. I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to stick to this. I'm going to keep at it. And then little by little, they'll begin to see things blossom and bloom after a while. Not only for the network marketer, but for other forms of business. You can see those things come to blossom because why? Those small efforts that you have done have paid off after a while. Envisioning the end requires embracing the resolve. Envisioning the end requires embracing the resolve. The resolve to be consistent with your small efforts. Small things, again, require resolve. And here it is. Resolve to ride the waves and storms of inner discouragement when there's outer disappointment. Inner discouragement when there's outer disappointment. Sometimes that outer disappointment is what you got to navigate. It's how you feel about what's going on. Disappointment is a feeling, but disappointment is also an indicator that, number one, this was supposed to happen. And since it was supposed to happen, since the route to point A to point B is never a straight line, but why? It requires a detour. Since it was supposed to happen, I'm okay with the ride along the detour. How many times have you been out there in traffic and this detour has you discouraged and disappointed because now you look at the time it's going to take you to get to where you need to be. I need to be at a certain spot. But had we not had the detour, we probably would have rode into danger. Had there not be a detour along the road whereby there's been a flash flood and you drove in there anyway, what would have happened? The bottom line was, not only would you have been disappointed and discouraged, but you would have been without an automobile. You would have been disabled. And so the bottom line is that detours are supposed to happen because from point A to point B is never a straight line. So we have to be resolved to ride the waves of inner discouragement and outer disappointment. We have to be resolved by understanding that no matter what it looks like now, it is my small little efforts that will win the day. No matter what it looks like now, it is my small little efforts that will win the day. No matter what the process demands, I am resolved to continue contributing small, constant efforts to achieve my end or my desired end. You should be, I should be, we should be resolved to continue contributing small, constant efforts to achieve any desired end. And I want to wrap up my time today by this quote that I want to leave you thinking about. And that is this: if you're not ready to go along for the ride, don't bother getting in the car. Remember, going from point A to point B is never a straight line. Sometimes we're going to incur things that we didn't plan on. It's going to be a pop-up. Sometimes we may not have the harvest at the time we desired. But it's the seed that we have right now that we are continually sowing that's going to produce that desired harvest. It's the small things that matter most in life, not the big things, because there is no big thing that did not come out of something very small. It's the little things. We've been looking at a compelling look as to why small things matter, part 2. I'll see you again as we do a part 3 concerning the same particular topic. God bless you. We'll talk to you then.